this will be the spookiest, scariest Halloween special you're ever going to hear. When it comes to employment law, that is. In this spooky Ask Law Lenz segment, I wanted to tackle Melody's question around what happens when an employer doesn't pay for time worked and the employee is left waiting for their payment, which eventually comes a couple of weeks later. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Law Lenz. My name is Sanam, and thank you so much for tuning into this spooky Halloween episode. I am so excited that you are all here tuning in because as of this episode being released, Law Lenz has been tracking along for officially a year now. That means the Employment Law Done Right podcast has been out there for you guys to listen to for the last year, which is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone out there that has taken their time to click on an episode, to listen to the episode, and even reach out to me on LinkedIn for commenting on my posts, for just engaging and really creating a community here where I absolutely feel the love and support day in and day out. So thank you so much. I hope you all know how big of a role you play in making Law Lenz what it is. I really wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for you because no one likes hearing about employment law, but somehow all of you keep coming back and tuning in and more of you keep trickling in. And if you're new to the podcast, then welcome. If you like this episode, then definitely subscribe and follow Law Lenz because we are all about making employment law better in the workplace and giving the support to employers and HR professionals and leaders that they truly need. Well, you know what time it is. It's time for Laughs with Law Lenz, where I give you a dry joke in these episodes. What's the problem with twin witches? You just never know which witch is which. I know. I had to do them. There's something about a dry joke that puts a pep in your step. And if it's a Halloween one, then chef's kiss. It's amazing. Anyways, so getting into what we're actually here for, which is talking about this particular question that came in from Melody. And yes, Melody allowed me to share her name and her question. And the question was really, really interesting in the sense that it wasn't about what happens if I never get paid for work, but it was what's the law around not being paid for the time that I've worked and then having to wait maybe another 2 weeks or some time before I get paid. So effectively, it's late or delayed payment when it comes to paying your wages. So I wanted to kick things off by saying, look, we know that this isn't the ideal situation. And I want you all to understand that even though it came from an employee, this episode, I wanted to talk about some tips and tricks, some practical things that you can use for your business and also as an employee, because I really want to steer away from the whole idea that the first port of call is to raise a claim or to go to labor inspectorate or to seek representation. There is a lot in the employment relationship that can be fixed a bit earlier on. And yes, it's not okay that employers don't pay on time, but sometimes there are reasons where their business might be not viable anymore and they're really just not coming to terms with that. I have seen it happen more often than not, especially given the industries that I've worked in. You can imagine in the thick of COVID, in the hospitality industry, and even now, just with the city businesses and the constructions that are happening throughout somewhere like Auckland City, the businesses are struggling to survive. So with that said, I wanted to tackle the first thing, which is why do we need to pay our employees on time? Obviously, we know that there are laws and legislation in place around that. But more importantly, you actually have a clause in your employment agreements that clearly states when an employee will get paid and the frequency they'll get paid. Also, it will have their remuneration and the amount and their hours in there as well. So the main clause would be around when the employee gets paid, how they're going to get paid, which is the most critical and important, because when the frequency changes or you miss a payment, then obviously an employee will raise concerns and be curious as to why they haven't been paid on time. So with Melody's question, I wanted to tackle the first part, which is around what happens when an employer doesn't pay on time. If you don't pay on time as an employer, let's say that you have cash flow issues or maybe something's going on there, then there is a chance that if this continues, then the employee can raise a personal grievance or go to the Employment Relations Authority. In most scenarios, what I've actually seen is that the employee ends up turning around and raising a personal grievance. But what is normally the first port of call for an employee is to look for a representative, an advocate, or somebody to kind of guide them. And if they're not paid their wages that are owed to them, then they can go down the more extreme route, which is going to the Employment Relations Authority, or even going as far as to complain to a labor inspectorate. You don't want that to happen. Obviously, they're going to come in, open up the books, and have a look at the entire business, see where things have gone wrong. But the employee can ask for the Employment Relations Authority to order the employer to pay the money that's owed to the employee. But like I said, this is a very interesting situation because it's not the same, right? We're not dealing with the situation where the employee has never been paid. It's just that the payment is delayed. So what happens in that case? We saw this happen in some cases around an employer not paying the employee because they had cash flow issues and the employee was constantly coming in and working. And what we saw in those cases quite often than not is that the employee would be paid out any amount of their normal wages that was owing to them, as well as any holiday pay and any public holiday pay or anything like that that was owed to them. Also, what gets taken into account is any other fees or interest that the employee had to pay. You do forget sometimes that a lot of people, money goes out for all of their expenses and their bills on the particular day that they get paid. If that payment gets missed, then there's a lot of repercussions for the employee that might not be as visible and noticeable to an employer. Now, what's really interesting here is that there is no discussion online when it comes to not paying your employees properly for short periods of time. And in this particular case with Melody, from what the question was, it seemed like the employer wasn't paying sometimes 2 weeks at a time, and all of a sudden Melody would get a lump sum amount of money. Now, the reality is, though, for all the leaders, employers, and HR out there, is that if an employee consistently keeps seeing this happening in the workplace, they will look at raising a claim. There is a high chance that they will do that. And that is because they'll be able to claim not being paid on time, the stress, and all of that has either led to their resignation, which could be a constructive dismissal, or maybe they could be in a situation where they claim that they've been disadvantaged somehow in the workplace or treated lesser than everyone else. Maybe someone else is getting paid and they're not being paid on time. If you're paying, let's say, your head chef, for example, but you're not paying your barista. Don't put yourself in that situation. Now, I would say if you're in a situation where you're having cash flow issues, you need to be aware of how to spot these issues. And this is probably moving away from what Melody asked, but this is more for you employers and you HR professionals out there. I want to help you understand what a business can do. And the first thing that you can do if you cannot make payment is make sure you notify your employees immediately. It's so much easier to just ignore the issue, right? To just sit back and not say a word, but instead, it is so much more important to be honest with them, to let them know so that they can make the arrangements that they need. And you may ask, why does the employee need to be notified? Well, it's your good faith obligations to make sure that you communicate with them effectively. So it is really important that you pay your employees on time. If you can't pay them, like I said, notify them. Once you've notified your employees, speak to them, set expectations for when you're going to be able to make that payment. When it comes to how to know how to spot these signs, make sure that you monitor whether you're late on your payments to your customers, whether you're without money at the time, is your bank account running low? All of these factors will play critical roles in understanding whether payroll can't be made. And the reason why I mention these is because you need to monitor these signs. If you're monitoring these signs and you're seeing that there is a cash flow issue, and that your forecasted cash flow, for example, doesn't actually match the exact cash flow that you have coming in now. All of those signs that I spoke about, that is what you need to monitor to make sure that you're prepared and that you understand the conversations that you need to have if you're not able to make payroll. It's better not to let the day pass. It's better to have the conversation with the employee, set the expectations, but do it only in situations where you really cannot pay your employees. I hope this really helped, Melody, and I hope that this gave a little bit of clarity into the situation in terms of what you can do. Now, in terms of tips, if you aren't able to make payment, please make sure you speak to the employee well beforehand. I know a lot of these things come up when you're down to the wire, but it's really important to have the conversation as early as you can. Set the expectation of when things are going to be paid. For employees, you have lots of options there for you. If the employer has made a mistake or maybe they missed a payment, but if the employer has only done this once and you understand that this wasn't the right thing to do, the employer understands it too, it'll be better if you can just have the conversation with your employer and see if you can squash it then and there. But if that can't be done and the employer is consistently not paying on time, then there are a lot of remedies that are available at the Employment Relations Authority level. But I would first say, try to speak to your employer. If the employer is not budging, they're constantly doing the same thing, then early resolution might be a great option for you to attend, where you can at least speak to a third party to try and figure out a way to settle the issue. And aside from that, raising a personal grievance would be your last port of call. I would really like for employees to steer away from that being the threat or the first port of call that they have. And that's why I say try to address this informally, try to go to some sort of mediation or even early resolution service can be a great option to try and recoup that money or to try and reach some sort of negotiated settlement. And to Melody, I am so sorry that you are dealing with this, and hopefully this has given you some clarity in terms of what you can do. And to all of those employers out there, I understand it is a struggle at the moment. It still is. We are years after the pandemic, but it is difficult for a lot of industries out there. So I understand the pain, but the law is the law, and it is very clear that you need to pay your employees. Do not get caught out being one of those employers that ends up paying $60,000 to their employee, plus fees, plus interest, plus all the compensation for all the stress, hurt, and humiliation they may have faced. So definitely don't be caught up in that. And this is it from me, everyone, in this Halloween special. I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for listening, and thank you so much for following the podcast. And for anyone that isn't, absolutely please give the podcast a follow. I am so excited to see so many people tagging along in this journey, and yay to 1 year of Law Lenz being out there. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you have a lovely day, night, evening, morning, and also make sure you have a lovely Halloween. I'll catch you in the next one, everyone.